Hi, my name is Skyler Stark, and I will be presenting on my research for Senior Capstone Project in International Relations. My research is entitled Communities for Decarceration, and I'm researching the relationship between nonprofits and grassroots organizations and communities and how they can implement sustainable social change to reduce incarceration rates. My research question is, can communities organize effectively to combat incarceration? So I'm looking at how community-based justice that operates outside of the state and government could be better utilized to restructure the very systems that mass incarceration is built on. This is due primarily because mass incarceration is inherently racist and based on discriminatory practices designed to uphold systems of oppression. The most vulnerable communities in America are impoverished and disproportionately minorities. So these communities are at most need of effective criminal justice reform. However, they're residing in areas that have higher levels of incarceration and criminalization. I theorize that nonprofit organizations advocating for decarceration, which inherently involves operating outside of the state, therefore outside of these systems of oppression, have potentially lower incarceration rates. This is an illustration by a nonprofit called Beyond Bricks and Bars, and it advocates for trans and gender diverse decarceration and supporting these people when they re-enter the community. In the literature, I find several different components that led me to choose decarceration as a strategy for reducing the population in the carceral state. A piece of literature that was a leader in the field, especially in social work, which I found interesting, is entitled From Mass Incarceration to Smart Decarceration. This was the beginnings of me understanding that smart decarceration must be equitable and socially just. In Abolition, a New Paradigm for Reform, it speaks about how reentry and prison ministries that are more prevalent on a national scale, they don't really question the sources of the criminal system. For my research design, I hypothesized that counties with a higher presence of nonprofit organizations advocating for decarceration will have lower incarceration rates. I look at 63 of the most populous counties in the United States. However, some states did not provide data for prison and jail incarceration rates. The independent variable was grassroots nonprofit organizations. I utilized a database called GuideStar, and in doing so, I looked at all of these counties, searching for keywords such as prison reform, incarcerated justice, abolition, and decarceration. I'll speak about this in a little bit, but I systematically didn't include some organizations such as prison ministries and most reentry organizations, as they're not quite advocating for decarceration in the way I wanted to study. For the dependent variable, I looked at the incarceration rate in jail, prison, and federal run facilities. I used this data from Vera Institute of Justice. This is how county level data is collected on the national scale. You can see the darker areas represent areas with extremely high incarceration rates. I compiled a list of over 300 organizations and then was able to put this into the 63 counties that I was studying. I found support for my hypothesis. So counties with more nonprofit organizations did indeed have lower incarceration rates. You can see this on the table below. There were some incarceration rates upwards of 2,000, but most resided in the 1,000 range of incarcerated per 100,000 residents aged 15 to 64. The number of nonprofit organizations advocating for decarceration was up to 28, which I found in Middlesex County in Massachusetts. The other high numbers are Brooklyn, New York, the Bronx, and New York County. This could be reactionary to previously high rates in states and counties that have really fought for decarceration measures, which is the case in New York. This shows that these organizations are working in some areas. Some of the lower rates that I found are lower population in rural areas, where the higher incarceration rates are resulting from a number of factors, but there's less population there, so that could be another reason that these same organizations aren't there. There's also an overall national trend of higher levels of prison and jail utilization in these rural areas instead of cities, which has been truer in decades past. It's important to recognize that this is a crude measure and not an exhaustive list due to me utilizing one database, and these are 501c3 filed nonprofit organizations. So there could be organizations that are operating outside of this, but in order to get a level measure, that is the database that I used. So I conclude that targeted decarceration approaches are necessary, but also effective in meeting community needs. Abolition activists advocate for not only ending mass incarceration as we know it, but reducing the need for prison in general. So both a front and back end approach to prison reform. A community justice must be accepted and woven into the fabric of our cities, in my opinion, to perpetuate sustainable social change and reduce the need for people in prisons. I recommend further research in Black abolitionist grassroots organizations because most of the history of people fighting for prison reform are Black women, as their communities have been targeted by criminalization. I also want to look at how other women of color feminism, such as carceral feminism, attribute to lower incarceration rates, and then the effects of COVID-19 on different decarceration efforts that have popped up nationally. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions.